If I put a business contract in front of you right now, would you sign it? Let's look at the terms. You provide 50% of the capital. You provide 100% of the labor. You assume all the liability. But here is the kicker. You have zero voting rights, zero authority over the direction of the company. And the other partner, they can dissolve the partnership at any time, for any reason, and walk away with half of your future earnings. You would laugh in my face. You would call it a scam. You would call it financial suicide. But in the dating market, society calls this the dream. They call it being a good man. And if you refuse to sign, they label you broken. They label you selfish. Welcome to the Economic Reality Check. Today, we are not talking about love. Love is a variable we cannot measure. We are talking about ROI, return on investment. Because nobody talks about this. Nobody tells you that modern relationships have quietly shifted from a partnership model to a service economy. Look at the data. We grow up being told that success means finding the one. That a man is incomplete until he has a woman to fix him. This is a marketing lie designed to create artificial demand. The system is designed to measure your worth solely by your utility. How much can you provide? How much can you sacrifice? How much pain can you absorb before you break? In economics, we call this a depreciating asset. You invest your prime years building an empire, only to find yourself trapped in a cycle of endless demands. More money, more effort, more proof. It is not a relationship. It is a subscription service where the price keeps going up, but the quality of the product keeps going down. Let's look at a case study. This is not a theory. This is market data. Meet Peter. User ID, Peter Blair, 6489. He spent decades in the system. He followed the rules. He played the good guy. And here is his audit report. Solitude is escape from everyone's expectations. As a man, I never realized how much everyone just expects you to give, without any recompense whatsoever, until I walked away from it all. I was trained to be a servant. Did you catch that? Trained to be a servant. Peter didn't lose love. He woke up to a simple accounting error. He was operating on a zero recompense model. In business, if you provide a service and get paid nothing, it's called charity. If you provide a service and get punished for it, it's called slavery. Peter realized that his relationship was essentially a bad employment contract. He was the CEO, the janitor, and the ATM. But he had no equity in the company. When he says solitude is escape, he is not using emotional language. He is using survival language. This is the cognitive dissonance that destroys modern men. You are told you are the king of the castle, but in reality, you are just the chief logistics officer for someone else's happiness. So when a man like Peter walks away, when he chooses silence over the chaos, the market panics, women panic, society panics. They scream commitment issues. They scream Peter Pan syndrome. But look at the numbers. He isn't running away from intimacy. He is executing a strategic withdrawal. He looked at the balance sheet. He saw the red ink. And he decided to stop funding a venture that has been bankrupt for years. This is the brutal truth regarding your solitude. It is not about being lonely. It is about reclaiming your liquidity, your time, your energy, your peace. These are finite resources. Why are you investing them in a black hole? Peter stopped being a servant, and the moment he did, he became free. But realizing the bad deal is only the first step. What happens when you stay in the deal too long? What happens when the market crashes? We have the data on that too, and it is ugly. Part 2. The Investment Audit. Most investors think a market crash happens overnight. They imagine a Black Tuesday, panic selling, red lines dropping vertically. But in the relationship market, the crash is almost never sudden. It is the result of decades of hidden inflation. You stay in the deal because of market blindness. You tell yourself, this is just how marriage is. Happy wife, happy life. You rationalize the cost. But an auditor, looking at the books, sees something different. He sees a creeping cost structure. Year 1, you lose your weekends. Year 5, you lose your friends. Year 10, you lose your voice. Year 20, you lose your soul. Let's open the books on a long-term merger. Case study number 2. User ID, Ecstatic 2. This is not a rookie investor. This man was in the market for 22 years. A blue-chip husband. Stable, loyal, consistent. But listen to what happened when the market finally corrected. It's like a tidal wave, crashed down on me, showing me how depressed I've been for the last 6+ years. I didn't realize how controlling and manipulative she is. She seems to care more about all the things I do on a day-to-day basis, instead of caring how I might be feeling. Let's dissect that. Cares more about things I do than how I feel. In corporate terms, this is not a partnership. This is micromanagement. His wife wasn't acting as a shareholder, invested in the company's long-term health. She was acting as a toxic middle manager. Her only focus was KPI, key performance indicators. Did he take out the trash? Did he pay the bills? Did he fix the sink? As long as the employee was hitting his targets, she didn't care if he was burning out. She didn't care about the human capital. She only cared about the output. And look at the lag time. He said he was depressed for 6+ years, but didn't realize it until the end. Why? Because men are conditioned to ignore internal audits. We are taught that our feelings are irrelevant to the market, so we suppress the data. We ignore the volatility until the system collapses. Ecstatic 2 describes it as a tidal wave. That is the moment the bubble bursts. That is the moment you realize you have been investing nearly 100% of your resources into a liability that views you as nothing more than a utility function. So what was his move? Did he try to fix the market? Did he try to negotiate better terms? No. Listen to his final statement. I will never get into another relationship for the rest of my years I have left. I just want to be left alone. That is not bitterness. That is a permanent market exit. He liquidated his position. He accepted the losses. And he revoked his trading license. He realized that in this specific market, the only winning move is not to play. But this raises a terrifying question. Ecstatic 2 got out. He survived the crash. But what happens when the partner decides they don't want to let you leave? What happens when they decide to turn your own assets against you? We are moving from bad business to hostile takeover. And for that, we need to look at the next case file, because it gets much darker. We have analyzed the contract. We have audited the bad management. But some of you, the optimists, are still holding on to a dangerous belief. You think, if I just pay my dues, if I just sacrifice enough, I will be protected. You believe that loyalty is a currency that accumulates interest over time. I am here to tell you that in the current market, loyalty is not a currency. It is a depreciating derivative. And the ultimate risk you face is not a simple bankruptcy. It is a hostile takeover. In the corporate world, when a partner wants to destroy you, they don't just liquidate the assets. They turn the board of directors against you. They launch a proxy war. And they seize control of your legacy, leaving you with nothing but the debt. Let's open case file number 3. User ID, Dainja. This is not a short-term volatility play. This is a long-term hold. 30 years, 3 decades of capital injection, 3 decades of labor, 3 decades of total provision. By all economic laws, this man should be the chairman of the board. He should be enjoying his dividends. But let's look at the exit report. After 30 years of marriage, my wife turned 3 of my 4 kids against me. I have been almost completely alienated by the family that I've taken care of and sacrificed heavily for throughout the years. I've been discarded. Read that again. Turned 3 of my 4 kids against me. This is the nuclear option in relationship warfare. In evolutionary psychology, we call this genetic hijacking. Children are a man's primary biological investment. You trade your life force, your time, and your resources to ensure their survival. The implicit contract is simple. You provide protection, and in return, you receive loyalty and legacy. But here, the partner has breached that contract in the most efficient way possible. She didn't just take the house. She didn't just take the pension. She weaponized the assets. She turned his own investment against him. And then, the word that reveals everything. Discarded. Dainja writes, "I've been discarded." This is not emotional language. This is industrial language. You discard a wrapper after you eat the candy. You discard a battery after it runs out of charge. You discard a tool when it is too broken to fix. This confirms the instrumentality of the modern male role. You are not loved for who you are. You are valued for what you function as. And when your function is exhausted, or when a newer model becomes available, your market value drops to 0. Instantaneously. Imagine the sunk cost fallacy here. 30 years. Most men would look at that loss and put a bullet in their brain. The ROI is negative 100%. The psychological damage is catastrophic. You spent your prime building a kingdom, only to be exiled from it by the very people you protected. This is the nightmare scenario. This is why we preach risk management, because if you invest 100% of your identity into external validators, your wife, your kids, your role as a provider, you are exposing yourself to infinite downside. You are building your house on land you do not own. But wait. Look at the data again. There is an anomaly in Dainja's report, something that defies the typical market crash pattern. He didn't collapse. He didn't fold. Listen to his closing statement. But I'm okay. I actually feel the strength coming through in a real way. I'm still standing. I am still standing. This is the pivot point. This is where the victim becomes the sovereign. Dainja realized a fundamental truth of economics. His net worth was never the family. His net worth was never the validation of his wife. Those were just leased assets. The only asset he actually owned was his own resilience, his own capacity to endure pain, his own ability to wake up in an empty house and say, "I am free." He writes, "I feel the strength coming through in a real way." Do you know what that strength is? It is the removal of the parasitic load. For 30 years, he was carrying the weight of ungrateful dependence. He was dragging a dead corporation uphill. Now that he has been discarded, he is actually unburdened. The parasite has detached. The bleeding has stopped. The energy he used to spend trying to please a hostile board of directors is now 100% his own. This brings us to the most uncomfortable question of all. If a man like Dainja, who gave everything can be erased from his own family. What makes you think you are safe? What makes you think your sacrifice is buying you insurance? The market does not care about your sacrifice. The market only cares about leverage. And the moment you signed that marriage contract, you handed over all your leverage. So, what is the solution? Do we give up? Do we curl up and die? No. We look at the men who survived the crash. We look at the men who rebuilt. Because the market is correcting itself, and the smart money is moving to a new asset class entirely. It is time to talk about the rebuild. In financial trading, there is a rule that separates the amateurs from the pros. It is called the stop loss. When a trade goes against you, the amateur holds on. He prays. He hopes. He tells himself, "It will come back. I have invested too much to quit now." And he rides the stock all the way down to zero. The professional? He looks at the data. He sees the trend is broken. He sells. He takes the small loss. And he preserves his capital for the next opportunity. In the relationship market, men are the worst traders in the world. We hold on to bad stock for decades. We operate on hope, not data. And we pay the ultimate price. Let's look at case file number 4. User ID, John Kwasniak, R3E. This man is a veteran. He didn't just fail once. He stress-tested the market 3 separate times. Listen to his trading history. I tried with 3 women. My son's mother and a couple single divorced mothers. Stayed 5 years too long with my son's mother trying to make it work. 14 years with her, 5 with the second, and 10 months with the last. Stayed 5 years too long. That right there is the sunk cost fallacy. John knew the deal was bad. The data was staring him in the face. Children were undisciplined. Women were selfish and uncompromising. But he stayed. Why? Because he had already invested 9 years. He didn't want to admit the investment was a failure, so he paid another 5 years of his life just to delay the inevitable. And the result? Lost most of what I built. This is the market crash we talked about. Decades of labor, gone. Assets divided, gone. Emotional energy depleted. Most men end their story here. They become bitter. They become broken. They become cautionary tales, drinking alone in a dark bar. But John executed a market correction. Listened to the turnaround, took a breath, rebuilt, and retired on schedule at 52. I'm 72 and enjoy my retirement on my terms. How is this mathematically possible? How does a man lose most of what he built and still retire on schedule at 52? The math is simple. When you eliminate a massive liability from your balance sheet, your profit margin explodes. Think about the operating costs of a bad relationship. The constant dates, the gifts, the legal fees, the mental energy spent arguing, the productivity lost to stress. John cut those costs to zero. He reallocated 100% of his resources back into the holding company, himself. And because he did that, he compounded his wealth faster in a few years of solitude than he could in decades of partnership. This brings us to the core misunderstanding of the modern man. Society tells you that walking away is quitting. They call it giving up. I call it strategic liquidation. If a business division is bleeding money for 14 years, you don't keep pumping cash into it. You shut it down. You cut the cancer out so the body can survive. John is now 72. He is looking back from the finish line. And he offers one final piece of insider trading advice. Being alone isn't being lonely. Read that again and let it sink in. Alone is a physical state. Lonely is an emotional deficit. A king sitting on his throne in an empty hall is alone. Is he lonely? No. He is sovereign. A CEO working late in his office is alone. Is he lonely? No. He is productive. John realized that solitude was not a prison, it was a laboratory, a place where he could rebuild his net worth, his peace, and his identity without interference. So, gentlemen, we are witnessing a mass market correction. Men are not boycotting marriage because they hate women. That is the narrative of the ignorant. Men are walking away because they have finally learned to read the balance sheet. They are realizing that the price of admission exceeds the value of the ride. We are seeing a generation of men who are choosing to be single and rich rather than married and broke, single and peaceful rather than married and stressed. But this freedom comes with a condition. You cannot just be single. You have to be something. Being single and useless is tragedy. Being single and powerful is a threat to the established order. So how do you become the threat? How do you transition from just a guy to the sovereign? That is the final lesson, the closing statement. We have talked about the bad contract. We have talked about the crash. We have talked about the rebuild. But there is one final hurdle. It is not economic. It is linguistic. Society has weaponized language to keep you in the pen. They use words like single, alone, bachelor. These words imply that something is missing, that you are a puzzle piece waiting for a matching set. But what happens when a man rejects that label entirely? Let's look at the final case file. User ID, Cozy Trucker. This man didn't just exit the market, he rebranded the entire corporation. Listen closely. I've stopped calling myself single. Now I refer to myself as free. I'm free from headship, headaches, and a honey to-do list. Some people call it selfish, but I call it self-care. Boom. Did you hear the shift? Single describes a relationship status. Free describes a political status. Cozy Trucker analyzed his overhead costs. Headship, headaches, honey-do lists. These are the hidden taxes of the service economy we discussed in Part 1. By eliminating them, he didn't become empty. He became efficient. And then, the defense mechanism. Some people call it selfish. Of course they do. When a slave stops working for the master calls him selfish. When a battery refuses to power the machine calls it defective. Selfish is the shaming tactic society uses when you stop being useful to them. But Cozy Trucker flips the script. He calls it self-care. He realizes that maintaining his own peace is not a sin. It is his primary fiduciary duty. This is the state of the sovereign man. A sovereign man does not ask for permission to buy a truck. He does not ask for permission to sleep in. He does not negotiate his peace with a terrorist who holds his emotions hostage. He owns 100% of his shares. He controls 100% of his voting rights. So, here is the verdict. The economics of solitude is not a tragedy. It is a wealth transfer. It is a transfer of energy, money, and focus. Away from a failing market and back into your own hands. Some of you are afraid. You are afraid of the silence. You are afraid of dying alone. Let me tell you the brutal truth. You were born alone. You will die alone. The only question is, will you live the time in between, as a servant seeking approval, or as a king building his own law? If you are currently holding on to a bad deal because you are afraid of the crash, look at Peter, look at John, look at Cozy Trucker. They didn't just survive the exit, they ascended. The market is correcting. The smart money is leaving the building, And for the first time in history, the price of freedom is cheaper than the cost of love. Choose yourself, sign your own contract, and never apologize for making a profit on your own life. I am the analyst, and class is dismissed.